Usually when we look at ancient religious texts, we picture this polished marble statue.
Oh, right. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you look at it, it's flawless, it's clean, it's elevated high above the dirt and grime of everyday life.
All right, completely detached from reality.
Exactly. We have this ingrained assumption that these foundational documents were penned in like quiet, sunlit studies by scholars who had unlimited time.
Unlimited time and perfect peace. Maybe a cup of tea resting on a mahogany desk.
Right, which, I mean, completely sanitizes the actual history for you, the learner.
It does. When you strip away the centuries of, institutional varnish and actually step into the world of the first century Roman Empire, that pristine marble statue just shatters.
It totally shatters because the text we are immersing ourselves in today is, well, it's the absolute antithesis of a sunlit study.
Yeah, it really is. It is smoky, it's raw, it's a survival document written from a place of profound, terrifying human vulnerability.
We are looking at a dispatch from a man sitting on death row. It's a letter traditionally known as 2 Timothy.
Right, functioning essentially as the last will and testament of the Apostle Paul.
Yeah. And we're anchoring this deep dive in a massive survey document by Chris Harvilasis.
Which is fantastic, by the way. It dissects the historical, textual, and the emotional layers of this letter so well.
It really does. But I want to set the hook for you right now, because this isn't a dry religious manual.
Not at all.
It is the frantic, final communication of a man dealing with mass betrayal.
Betrayal, incredibly fragile social networks, and a desperate need to pass the baton right before the executioner's blade falls.
Okay, let's unpack this, because you really can't read a death row letter without understanding the prison it was written in.
You definitely can't.
So, what is the actual environment closing in on Paul here?
Well, to grasp the sheer panic and urgency bleeding through the margins of this letter, we really have to start with the smell of the smoke in Rome.
The smoke, right?
Yeah. We are looking squarely at the mid-60s AD, the Neronian era. More specifically, the immediate aftermath of the Great Fire of Rome in AD 64.
Right, the fire that effectively burned down, what, 2/3 of the city?
Just about, yeah. It pushed Emperor Nero into a massive PR crisis.
To put it mildly.
Right. I mean, it was an existential crisis for his regime. Roman populace was furious.
And there were rumors swirling, right, that Nero himself had ordered the fire to clear land for his new palace complex, the Domus Aurea.
Exactly. And whether he did or not is, heavily debated by historians today.
Right.
But the political reality was that Nero desperately needed a scapegoat to deflect the mob's anger.
You need someone to take the fall.
Yeah. And he found that scapegoat in a small, misunderstood, and widely disliked minority group, the early Christians.
Which is wild, because before AD 64, from the Roman perspective, Christians were largely viewed as just a messy internal Jewish sect, right?
Pretty much, yeah. Just a theological dispute happening out in the margins of the empire.
They weren't even on the radar.
They were completely invisible to the imperial machinery, but the fire changed that overnight. Nero initiated the first official imperial persecution. The entire state apparatus was turned directly against them.
And it was brutal.
Oh, incredibly brutal. The historian Tacitus gives us these gruesome accounts of how Christians were treated.
Right.
They were covered in the skins of wild beasts and torn apart by dogs, or nailed to crosses and set on fire to serve as human torches for Nero's gardens.
Just absolute horror. So the environment shifts from mere neighborhood prejudice to active state-sponsored terror.
Exactly. Rome is not just the backdrop of 2 Timothy. Rome is the active antagonist.
The state is the predator.
And Paul is caught right in its jaws. In chapter 4 of this letter, he states plainly that his life is, quote, being poured out as a drink offering.
He knows it's over.
Yeah, he says the time of his departure has come. He is looking his own execution right in the face.
Which brings us to the social conditions surrounding that imprisonment. Because the first century Roman world was driven entirely by this honor-shame cultural dynamic.
Right, and that is so crucial to understand.
I think we need to dissect what that actually means for the listener, because it's not how we think of shame today at all.
Not even close. We tend to psychologize shame today. We think of it as this internal embarrassment.
Oh, I'm embarrassed to admit my weird niche hobby at a dinner party.
Exactly. But in Rome, society was structurally bound together by the patron-client system.
Right.
It was this massive web of favors, protection, and public loyalty. You survived based on who you were publicly associated with.
It's almost like a citywide mafia structure,
Yeah.
right? Like if the local boss decides you're out, you don't just lose friends,
You lose your livelihood.
Yeah, you lose your ability to buy food in the market, you lose physical protection. Association is literally currency.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize it. Loyalty was not a feeling in your heart. Loyalty was an observable public action.
Right.
If your patron fell out of favor with the emperor, the safest thing you could do, really the only thing you could do to survive, was to publicly sever ties.
You distance yourself and just let them fall alone.
Exactly.
So when Paul repeatedly tells Timothy, do not be ashamed, and he says it in chapter 1, verse 8, again in verse 12, again in verse 16.
It's a huge theme.
He isn't telling Timothy to stop blushing or feeling insecure. He is telling him not to sever that patron-client bond just to save his own skin.
Yes. Because to align yourself with a man chained in a Roman holding cell under a treason charge from Emperor Nero,
That's a death sentence.
it was inviting the gaze of the empire onto your own neck. It was social suicide and likely literal suicide.
Kind of like modern cancel culture, but instead of losing your social media followers, you lose your head.
That's exactly it. The stakes were absolute.
And because of that terrifying reality, the people in Paul's network were actively doing the math and choosing survival.
Yeah, they were bailing.
He writes that Asia has largely deserted me. He's completely abandoned. Which leads to this detail in the text that completely shatters that marble statue illusion we started with.
Oh, the cloak.
Yes. In chapter 4, verse 13, he asks Timothy to bring him a cloak that he left in a city called Troas, along with some books, and specifically the parchments.
The juxtaposition there is just jarring. You have these sweeping cosmic theological statements about Christ abolishing death in one breath.
And in the next, the desperate logistics of a freezing old man.
Exactly, because Roman prisons, like the Mamertine prison, the Tullianum, they were not modern penitentiaries.
There's no cafeteria.
No. The state did not feed you, they did not clothe you, and they certainly didn't care if you froze in the damp subterranean dark.
So you were entirely reliant on your outside network to smuggle in food and warm clothing.
Right. And if your network abandons you because they are terrified of being associated with a state criminal,
You freeze. You starve to death before you even make it to your execution.
yeah, that mundane request for a heavy winter jacket makes the danger incredibly concrete.
It really bridges the gap between, divine text and the gritty, uncomfortable reality of human deprivation.
It makes it real.
But, okay, let me play devil's advocate here.
Oh,
Because if we look at the broader landscape of New Testament scholarship, those exact hyper-specific details.
The jacket, the books.
Yeah, a forgotten jacket in Troas, or a guy named Trophimus, left sick in Miletus. Those details are at the absolute center of a massive academic war.
Oh, they absolutely are.
How can a letter be so personal yet so heavily disputed regarding who actually held the pen?
Well, the authorship of the pastoral epistles, so that's 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, and Titus, is one of the deepest fault lines in biblical studies.
Really?
Oh, yeah. On one side, you have the traditional, often evangelical view, which takes the text at its word.
Meaning Paul of Tarsus wrote this from a cold cell in Rome shortly before his death.
Exactly. But to make that timeline work, you have to do some historical gymnastics.
Right, because of the book of Acts.
Yeah. Acts, which is the historical sequel to the Gospels, ends with Paul in Rome, but he's under house arrest.
He's renting his own place. He's receiving visitors, preaching openly.
It's relatively mild. It does not match the grim, subterranean death row vibe of 2 Timothy at all.
So how does the traditional view square that circle?
It necessitates the second Roman imprisonment theory. It posits that Paul was released from that initial house arrest in Acts 28, went on a fourth missionary journey.
Like maybe to Spain, back to Ephesus, Crete, Troas.
Right, and was then rearrested when Nero cranked up the heat after the fire, resulting in this much harsher final imprisonment.
I mean, it's a plausible reconstruction, but the other side of the scholarly divide looks at this entirely differently, right?
Completely differently.
The critical view championed by institutions like Cambridge and detailed heavily in our source is highly skeptical.
They argue that this letter is a pseudonymous composition.
So essentially it wasn't written by Paul at all.
Right. They suggest it was written by a later Pauline school follower, perhaps decades after Paul's death.
Okay, but why? What's their evidence for that?
While critical scholars point to several things, the vocabulary is significantly different from Paul's undisputed letters.
Like he's using different words.
Yeah, lots of unique words. Also, the church structure seems a bit too developed for the mid-60s AD.
Ah, I see.
And they view pseudepigraphy, which is writing under a false name, not as a malicious forgery, but as an accepted ancient literary convention.
See, I struggle with that. I really do.
A lot of people do.
The idea that a later follower would sit down, decades after Paul is dead, and invent a forgotten coat in Troas just to add some flavor text.
Right. It seems counterintuitive.
Yeah. If this is a theological treatise meant to honor a mentor, why include the embarrassing, mundane details? You don't invent a forgotten jacket to make a high-minded theological point.
Well, the critical counterargument is that inventing the jacket is exactly what you do to make the letter believable.
To make it sound authentic.
Exactly. It creates verisimilitude. It grounds the philosophical instruction in a believable narrative framework.
So it's basically a literary device saying, if Paul were here with us in the 90s AD, dealing with these new heresies, this is what he would say.
That's the argument, yes.
Let's bring the hard dirt of archaeology into this, because the manuscript evidence adds a whole new layer of complexity.
It really does.
Let's look at Papyrus 46, or P46.
Right. P46 is basically the heavyweight champion of early New Testament manuscripts. It dates to roughly AD 200.
And it's a papyrus codex, right? An ancient book
Correct.
rather than a scroll.
Yes. And it contains a massive collection of Paul's letters.
But the critical detail is what P46 does not contain.
Exactly. It does not appear to contain 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, or Titus.
Wait, hold on. If the earliest, most important physical collection of Paul's letters completely excludes this document, doesn't that immediately throw a massive red flag on the traditional authorship claim?
You would think so.
The critical scholars must use P46 as their ace in the hole.
They absolutely do. They argue it proves the pastorals weren't accepted as genuinely Pauline by the earliest compilers.
But is it that simple?
No, because the physical mechanics of ancient books complicate the picture. P46 is a single quire codex.
What does that mean?
Imagine taking a stack of paper, folding it in half, and stapling the middle.
Oh, okay, so the outer pages are the most exposed. They'd be the first to get ripped off and destroyed over the centuries.
Precisely. And P46 is missing its outermost leaves.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Based on mathematical calculations of the scribe's handwriting size and the number of missing pages, some scholars argue there was mathematically enough room for the pastoral epistles to have been included on those lost outer leaves.
So it's a probability game. We just don't know for sure.
We don't. But then you jump forward a little over a century, and the debate shifts again with Codex Sinaiticus.
Right. Codex Sinaiticus is a 4th century marvel.
Yeah, it really is. It's an almost complete Greek Bible written on animal skin vellum, produced around the time of Emperor Constantine.
And Sinaiticus does include 2 Timothy. Unquestionably.
Yes. So by the 300s AD, whatever the origins were, the canonical stability of St. Timothy was locked in.
The broader church recognized it as authoritative scripture. And part of why it resonated so deeply is because of the intense, localized pressure it addresses. Let's talk about where this letter was being sent.
Yes, Timothy's context.
Timothy isn't in a vacuum. He's pastoring in Ephesus.
And if you understand the archaeology and the socioeconomic engine of Ephesus, you understand the sheer weight crushing down on Timothy.
Ephesus was a crown jewel of the Roman province of Asia, right?
Yes. It was a massive maritime trade hub, the terminus of major Roman roads.
And it was home to the Temple of Artemis, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world.
Right. We aren't talking about a quaint little neighborhood shrine here.
No. The Artemisian was a colossal economic engine.
It functioned as a major bank for the region. The silversmith guilds, the merchants, the civic leaders.
Their entire wealth and societal stability were inextricably tied to the worship of Artemis and the broader Greco-Roman polytheistic system.
Exactly. So imagine being Timothy. You are a young leader of a tiny, marginalized, monotheistic house church.
Trying to tell people that the gods made with human hands aren't real.
Right. You aren't just insulting their religion, you are threatening their GDP.
You are threatening the silversmiths' livelihoods.
The pressure to just blend in, to water down the message so you don't agitate the local economy or the imperial cult, it must have been suffocating.
Which brings us to the actual architecture of Paul's response to that pressure.
Yeah, the structure of the letter.
If we step back and look at the macro structure of the 4 chapters, it's remarkably systematic for a letter written from a cold cell.
It really is. The architecture is fascinating.
Chapter 1 is a mandate for courage in suffering, right?
Yeah.
Like, do not hide the gospel.
Yes. And chapter 2 transitions to the mechanics of the minister's vocation, how to endure and accurately pass the message on.
Then chapter 3 addresses the intensification of societal deception and the grounding authority of Scripture.
And finally, chapter 4 is the climax. It's this final, breathless charge to preach persistently, ending with Paul's personal reflections on finishing his race.
Tying all four of those movements together is a very specific Greek vocabulary.
Right. Paul uses a series of intense imperatives: guard, endure, flee, pursue, preach.
It's a linguistics mind built on the contrast between fidelity and desertion.
Exactly.
I really want to dig into that original language study because translating these Greek concepts unlocks the actual mechanisms of what Paul is asking Timothy to do.
It changes everything.
Let's start with the word paratheka.
Parathe. It appears in chapter 1, verses 12 and 14. In English, it's usually translated as deposit or entrusted treasure.
Paul tells Timothy to guard the good deposit. I was trying to think of an analogy for this because it's not just about protecting information.
No, it's much more active.
Right. It's more like a generational trust fund. Or maybe a family's heirloom sourdough starter that's been kept alive for 100 years.
Oh, I love that.
Right. Because if you inherit that sourdough starter, your job is not to chemically engineer a better yeast.
Right. You don't mess with it.
Your job is to feed it, protect it from contamination, keep it alive, and pass it to the next generation without diluting the original formula.
The trust fund analogy is historically perfect, actually.
Really?
Yeah. In Greco-Roman law, a paratheke was a highly specific financial and legal term.
Oh, wow.
If you were a merchant going on a dangerous, years-long voyage, you didn't have a modern banking system to secure your wealth.
You couldn't just wire it to an offshore account.
Right. You would take your life savings and literally hand it to a trusted friend, a deposit.
And the implicit contract is, do not touch this.
Their singular sacred duty was to return it to you exactly as you gave it to them. They couldn't invest it in risky maritime ventures. They couldn't spend a little bit of it.
They just had to guard it.
Exactly. Paul is taking that strict financial concept and applying it to the apostolic message. The gospel is a paratheke. It is an entrusted deposit.
It's not a rough draft for Timothy to culturally adapt or innovate upon to make it more palatable to the Ephesians.
No, it is a deposit to be fiercely guarded.
But guarding it doesn't mean just putting it in a lockbox and burying it in the dirt. Because he pairs it with the word anazopyrene in chapter 1, verse 6.
Ah, yes. Fan into flame. Paul reminds Timothy to, and a ship carrying, the gift of God.
Picture a blacksmith using a bellows on dying embers. The fire's there, the deposit is there, but if you don't pump the bellows,
If you don't introduce oxygen and friction.
it goes out. It tells us that spiritual gifts or ministry callings are not static possessions. They require aggressive cultivation.
And that cultivation requires immense discipline, which is why Paul immediately pivots in chapter 2 to 3, vivid metaphors of grueling, unglamorous effort.
The soldier, the athlete, and the hardworking farmer.
Right. The soldier who refuses to get tangled up in civilian pursuits because he needs to please his commanding officer.
The athlete who has to train according to the strict rules to receive the victor's wreath.
And the farmer who does the brutal, back-breaking labor to get the first share of the crops.
Notice what all three have in common, though. Delayed gratification and immense physical exertion.
But here is the theological genius of the passage. Right before Paul gives those metaphors of extreme effort, he says in chapter 2, verse 1, "Be strengthened by the grace that is in Christ Jesus."
Grace-empowering effort.
Yes. The modern mind often pits grace against effort. We think if something is by grace, it must be effortless.
Like you just sit back and let it happen.
Right. But Paul completely obliterates that. Grace is the fuel that allows the soldier to march, the athlete to train, and the farmer to plow.
Grace does not cancel out the sweat. It produces it.
Exactly.
And a huge part of that sweat is intellectual. It's doctrinal precision. That brings us to my absolute favorite word in the whole survey. Orthotomich in chapter 2, verse 15.
Orthotomiju, literally translated as straightly cutting or rightly handling the word of truth.
The imagery is so tactile. Think of Paul's actual day job. He was a tent maker.
Right. He worked with leather and heavy canvas.
If you are cutting panels for a massive tent and your cuts are sloppy, curved, or careless, the entire structure leaks.
It falls apart.
The same applies to a stonemason cutting a foundational block or a farmer plowing a straight furrow.
Sloppy handling of the material leads to structural collapse. Paul contrasts this straight cutting with the quarreling over words, or the irreverent babble of the false teachers in Ephesus.
Which he actually likens to gangrene.
Right.
Yeah.
Gangrene spreads and consumes healthy tissue. Inaccurate, careless teaching destroys the community from the inside out.
Which culminates in the foundational bedrock of chapter 3. If you are going to straightly cut the word, what exactly is the word? Chapter 3, verse 16 gives us the word the amnustos.
God-breathed. It's a compound word. Theos meaning God, and niche meaning to breathe.
It's often translated as inspired, but God breathed carries so much more weight, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It implies an animating life force, like in Genesis, where God breathes into the dirt and creates a living soul.
Paul is asserting that the sacred writings are not merely historical records. They possess a divine, animating origin.
And because they are God-breathed, they are sufficient to equip the leader to survive the intense deception of the culture.
So you have this incredible architecture. Guard the legal deposit, the peritheiko. Pump the bellows to keep the fire alive, anaspirine.
Cut the canvas straight without sloppy errors or orthotomy.
All because the text you are working with is the very breath of God Theopneustos.
It's a brilliant strategic framework.
But a strategy on paper means nothing if you don't have flesh and blood people willing to execute it.
Right.
And this is where the letter becomes heartbreakingly human. The test is populated with this cast of characters, some who grab the baton with a white-knuckled grip, and some who just drop it and vanish into the crowd.
The sociology of the early church is really laid bare in these names. Let's start with Timothy himself, the recipient of the peritheiko.
We know his strengths. He has a sincere faith. He's a trusted delegate. But Paul also specifically targets a vulnerability.
Yeah, he writes in chapter 1, verse 7, "For God gave us a spirit not of fear, but of power and love and self-control."
There is an undeniable implication there that Timothy is battling timidity.
And frankly, who wouldn't be?
Right.
We've established the context. He's young, he's outmatched by the Ephesian economic machine, the emperor is using his fellow believers as human torches.
And his mentor is in a subterranean cell awaiting execution. Timidity is the highly rational human response.
Exactly. But Paul doesn't just say tough it out. He anchors Timothy's courage in his own history.
He reminds Timothy of where his faith came from, which introduces two of the most significant yet overlooked characters in the text, Lois and Eunice.
Chapter 1, verse 5. "I am reminded of your sincere faith, a faith that dwelt first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and now I am sure dwells in you as well."
This is a massive sociological detail for you, the listener, to catch. The first-century Roman world was hyper-patriarchal.
Completely. The paterfamilias, the male head of the household, had absolute legal authority.
Yet here, the generational transmission of the faith completely bypasses the patriarchal structure.
Yeah. Timothy's father was Greek, likely an unbeliever. The theological heavy lifting was done entirely by active, female, domestic discipleship.
It proves that the preservation of this deposit didn't rely on formal seminaries or massive institutions.
No, it relied on a grandmother and a mother teaching a child in the quiet spaces of a home.
It's the heirloom sourdough starter in practice. Lois gave it to Eunice. Eunice gave it to Timothy.
But not every inheritance survives the pressure. We have to look at the tragic foil to Timothy. We need to talk about Demas.
Oh, Demas.
Demas is a warning siren for anyone in leadership. In chapter 4, verse 10, Paul delivers a devastating eulogy for a living man.
For Demas, in love with this present world, has deserted me and gone to Thessalonica.
That stinks.
And it's vital to note that Demas wasn't just some fringe congregant. In Paul's earlier letters, like Philemon and Colossians, Demas is explicitly listed as a fellow worker.
He was in the inner circle, he had the proximity, he had the vocabulary, he was in the room where it happened.
But proximity to leadership does not equal internalized faithfulness.
Exactly. When the external heat of Nero's persecution was turned up, the internal reality of Demas was revealed. He was in love with this present world.
And we shouldn't view that purely as a philosophical, abstract love of sin, right?
Right. Going to Thessalonica wasn't just a random travel choice.
Thessalonica was a booming, wealthy, cosmopolitan trade hub on the Via Ignatia.
It represented safety, distance from Rome, commercial opportunity, and a return to the comfortable patron-client networks.
Demas did the calculus. He weighed the freezing squalor of the Mamertine prison against the lucrative safety of Thessalonica, and he chose physical survival.
Which, if we are completely honest, makes total sense from a self-preservation standpoint.
Right. It's tragic, but it is deeply understandably human. Demas chose not to be the guy who gets executed alongside the state enemy.
But that reasonable, calculated cowardice is immediately contrasted with the reckless, astonishing loyalty of Onesiphorus.
Chapter 1, verse 16. Paul writes that Onesiphorus often refreshed me and was not ashamed of my chains. But when he arrived in Rome, he searched for me earnestly and found me.
Let's break down the mechanics of that search. It's an incredible logistical feat.
When Onesiphorus traveled from Ephesus to Rome, that isn't a quick flight.
No, that is a dangerous, expensive, multi-month maritime and overland journey.
And when he gets to Rome, Paul isn't in a clearly marked county jail with visiting hours.
He's caught in the sprawling, chaotic Roman carcer system, when Cephas has to actively navigate the underbelly of the imperial capital.
Asking questions, seeking out a man who is actively wanted for treason by the emperor.
The phrase, "he was not ashamed of my chains," takes on literal life and death meaning here, when Cephas willingly walked into the blast zone.
By associating with Paul, by bringing him that coat, by bringing him food, when Onesiphorus essentially told the Roman authorities, I am with him.
He risked his own head to bring comfort to a dying man.
It is the ultimate display of honor in an honor-shame culture.
It really is.
But the cast of characters also includes active, malicious saboteurs, like Alexander the Coppersmith. Paul says in chapter 4, Alexander the Coppersmith did me great harm. The Lord will repay him according to his deeds.
We don't have the historical record to know exactly what Alexander did. As a metalworker, he might have been tied to the Ephesian silversmith guilds and led an economic boycott against the church.
Or perhaps he testified against Paul in a Roman court, serving as an informant.
Whatever the mechanism, it proves that opposition isn't always an abstract philosophical debate. Sometimes it is highly personal, deeply petty, and incredibly damaging.
You have Demas, who runs away, Onesiphorus, who runs into the fire, and Alexander, who actively tries to burn the house down.
It leaves Paul in this state of profound isolation. Asia has largely deserted me.
Which forces a reckoning with how we define a successful life or ministry.
Absolutely.
And that is exactly where I want to take this for our final segment. The so what? We've excavated the ruins of Nero's Rome. We've debated the papyrus leaves of P46. We've parsed the Greek grammar, and we've analyzed the psychology of Demas.
We've covered a lot.
But how does this ancient, smoky survival document actually interface with you, the modern learner listening right now?
Well, it offers a devastating critique of how contemporary culture measures success. We live in an era that equates public platforms, upward mobility, and stadium-sized influence with faithfulness.
Upward trajectory is our only metric.
But here is the greatest missionary of the early church, the man who fundamentally shaped the theology of the Western world. How does his career end?
Not with a massive book deal or a retirement gala.
It ends in an empty subterranean cell, abandoned by his closest associates, asking a friend to smuggle him a winter coat.
If you apply modern metrics of success to the Apostle Paul, his life ended in absolute, abject failure.
But the paradox of 2 Timothy is that Paul does not view himself as a failure. He redefines success as simple fidelity to the deposit.
In chapter 2, verse 2, he gives what might be the most concise leadership succession plan ever written. And what you have heard from me in the presence of many witnesses entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also.
That is 4 generations encapsulated in one sentence. Paul, Timothy, faithful people, others also.
The genius of that model is that it is the ultimate antidote to ego-driven leadership. If a movement, a company, or a church relies entirely on the charisma of a single founder, it will inevitably die with that founder.
Paul is saying, your ultimate success is making yourself obsolete. Your job is to find people with the character, the faithfulness, to carry the sourdough starter forward.
And notice the qualification. He doesn't say, entrust this to the most charismatic speakers or the wealthiest patrons.
He says faithful men. Because as we saw with Demas, talent and proximity mean nothing if you lack the grit to endure when the cultural wind turns against you.
And the cultural wind is always going to turn. Conflict is inevitable. Which brings up another massive point of contemporary relevance from the text, how we handle opposition.
Oh, this is huge.
I want to look at chapter 2, verses 24 to 26. In our current cultural climate, this advice is almost aggressively countercultural.
Paul writes that the Lord's servant must not be quarrelsome, but kind to everyone, able to teach, patiently enduring evil, correcting his opponents with gentleness.
Correcting his opponents with gentleness. Look at our public square today. Look at social media. Outrage is the primary currency.
The goal is the dunk.
The goal is to absolutely obliterate your opponent in public, screenshot their humiliation, and collect the likes from your tribe.
But Paul says the mechanism of truth cannot be separated from the character of the messenger. Why do we correct with gentleness? He continues. God may perhaps grant them repentance leading to a knowledge of the truth, and they may come to their senses and escape from the snare of the devil.
The goal isn't to win the argument. The goal is the restoration of the human being across from you.
It creates a necessary tension with that word orthotomy we discussed earlier. You must have doctrinal precision, the straight cutting of the word. but that precision must be wielded with pastoral gentleness.
Right. If you have precision without gentleness, you are just swinging a scalpel in the dark, causing massive tissue damage.
But if you have gentleness without precision, you compromise the structural integrity of the deposit. You must hold both.
And holding both of those things in a hostile environment guarantees one thing: you are going to suffer.
Yeah, that brings us to how Tinny Timothy forces us to reframe our view of hardship.
Modern Western culture generally treats suffering as a glitch in the matrix. If you are experiencing hardship, the assumption is that you must be doing something wrong. You need to optimize your life better.
2 Timothy normalizes suffering. The Greek word enkakopathosin, share in suffering, appears repeatedly. Paul tells Timothy to share in suffering as a good soldier.
Suffering isn't an anomaly in the mission. It is the terrain on which the mission is executed.
It's the already not yet tension of history. Chapter 1, verse 10 declares that Christ has abolished death and brought immortality to light. The decisive D-Day victory is accomplished.
Yet the final consummation hasn't happened. We live in the muddy, contested middle time.
A time characterized by endurance, teaching, and often profound loss. If you interpret hardship as proof that truth has failed, you will end up like Demas, running for the comfort of Thessalonica.
Which makes Paul's final metaphor so incredibly resonant. In chapter 4, right before the sign-off, he writes, "For I am already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure has come. I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith. Henceforth there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness."
The vocabulary there is steeped in the ancient athletic games. Agonizomai, he has agonized, he has strived in the wrestling match.
He has completed the dromos, the grueling race course.
And he is waiting not for a reprieve from the executioner, but for the Stephanos, the victor's wreath awarded by the righteous judge.
His life is emptying out like a cup of wine poured on an altar. It is exhausting, it is lethal, but it ends in absolute, unshakable hope.
It is the ultimate proof that finishing the race well matters infinitely more than starting it with fanfare. The end of a faithful life, even when it concludes in a Roman death row, is not despair, it is vindication.
We have covered massive ground today. We started by inhaling the smoke of Nero's burning Rome in AD 64, examining the lethal stakes of the patron-client system.
We waded through the complex textual debates surrounding the papyrus degradation of P46 and the vellum authority of Codex Sinaiticus.
We unpacked the architectural genius of guarding the Parathoka, fanning the flame, and straightly cutting the God-breathed word.
We witnessed the tragic human frailty of Demas prioritizing safety and the staggering, quiet heroism of Onesiphorus navigating the Roman prison system.
We saw how the faith survived not through imperial decrees, but through the quiet, intergenerational persistence of women like Lois and Eunice.
And we wrestled with the mandate to build success not on viral influence, but on the careful, gentle passing of the baton to faithful people.
So as you, the learner listening to this, navigate your own landscape, whether you are leading a corporation, raising children, studying ancient history, or just trying to sift through the exhausting barrage of modern information, remember the mechanics of this letter.
Hold fast to the sound words. Do not chase the cultural novelties of your own Thessalonica. Guard the deposit entrusted to you, and actively seek out those faithful people into whom you can pour your own hard-won wisdom.
I want to pull us all the way back to that shattering of the marble statue. We tend to view the arc of history as this robust, inevitable march of progress. But the preservation of the ideas that fundamentally shaped Western civilization hung by an incredibly fragile thread.
Very fragile.
I want you to sit with this image. Paul of Tarsus, shivering in the damp subterranean dark of a Roman holding cell, entirely dependent on whether or not a few terrified friends possessed the courage to risk their own execution just to visit him.
Think about his final mundane request for his heavy coat.
And specifically the parchments. If you knew the clock had run out, if you were stripped of all your status, your digital networks, your comforts, and you were facing your final days in total isolation, what are the texts, the notes, the truths, or the parchments that you would beg someone to smuggle into the dark to anchor your mind?